Right, I'll do a bit of quick fire questions with you. In relation to checking hedgerows, am I correct in saying that the system you're using at the moment, is it 0.1 of a hectare? If it's under that, you're not able to count it, is that correct?
So as Deputy, you're talking about forests and trees?
Trees, yes, and hedgerows and all that.
Basically, I suppose, from the forest land definition, anything that's 0.1 hectares or more is counted in the forest land category, correct? And
have you an account of everything under that?
We don't account for anything under 0.1 in the forest land category.
Am I correct in saying that all of this that you're talking about is applicable after 2030, that whatever comes in now, from my understanding, listening to Minister Ryan and indeed others, that it's from 2030 on that this will come as a benefit to Ireland in the amount of sequestration and carbon tonnage that it's able to minus. Is that correct?
I suppose, Deputy, if you plant trees today, they're quite small and they won't sequester.
I'm talking about the ones that's planted already, the hedgerows that we haven't counted and all of that. We've been told that it's 2030. Is that correct?
I'll have to get back to that, Deputy. As regards a baseline study, you have to do a baseline study first.
So just
2005.
Clear, our hedges are counted in the national inventory under grassland. Okay, so the current stock, if you want to call it that, is accounted for under that category. I can't comment in terms of in 2030 does that materially change in terms of slicing them out. What we are looking at, let's say, is the question of, well, look at if you want to get inventory credit in terms of additionality associated with hedges, whether it's management or improved or increased length of hedges, well, then we are putting the work in place at the moment to at least be able to quantify that.
Right. Mr. Poots in the north has brought in the LIDAR system, which is, I've seen it myself used in bogs, a pretty effective way. They're doing it for both soils and for all the amount of carbon that's stored in hedges and in, say, all the trees around the country and the different hedges. Why haven't we done that as a country to do the same as what they're doing in Northern Ireland or tie up with them? The way we'll have an accurate account of what we have sequestered and what you can actually do two trials. You can do it now, and I've seen it the day we were out at the Devonish farm, where you can do it in a few years' time and you'll know what you have sequestered in between. Why haven't we done something like that?
So there's a cost associated with LIDAR, but I can't comment in terms of OPW, but it is my certain understanding that it's in their intention to do LIDAR mapping next year.
But would it not be, I know that it's, you're saying the OPW, we're talking about this affecting farmers, we're talking about this affecting the livelihoods of farmers. Would it not be the Department of Agriculture that it would liaise with, be it the Climate Action Department and like the OPW, sort of the last throw of the dice? They don't really have a big interest in that, to be honest about it. It's agriculture and climate action that are the big ones that play here. Would it not be worth our while lead the way in that? Or is it that there's no budget given to you for that?
I wouldn't accept that, Deputy, because if you look at it from terms of the credit, you do have to be conscious as well, though, that I think if we look at, we are losing be addressed and is being addressed. We potentially review the environmental impact assessment regulations. We've committed to reviewing the environmental impact assessment in terms of the protections, you know, for hedges, and you just have to look to farming media to identify quite a number of cases of
would it not be accurate, though, to state that at the moment we're talking about what a cow or a bullock or a heifer, whatever, puts up? We're able to give all them figures. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. But we don't know on the other side what we're taking in hedges nationwide, what's on the motorways, what's planted in different parts of the country, what's coming in barley or all the different cereal crops, what grass is sequestered, and what all the different things that's out there in the rural areas, what it's sequestered. We have no clue, and you'd imagine that before you start off making an assumption, and it's not ye, but it's the media in general are trying to kick the daylights out of the farming sector, and there's no, basically, there's no pluses given to them for what they're doing, while at the same time there doesn't seem to be any talk about the sewage treatment plant in Dublin, what methane is coming out of that, or what harm they're doing. Why haven't we an accurate assessment done and enough research done on all the different types of farming and the different, as I've outlined in the line of barley, wheat, trees, grass, when it's ate and grows again, what's it sequestered on a constant basis? Why haven't we done something like that?
So I couldn't accept that, Deputy, in terms of the identification that there isn't a knowledge in terms of that, because I think it's a question for the committee maybe to put to the EPA, but as I understand, there's over 1,000 lines of various inventory data that is what populates our overall emissions. So there are emission factors associated with peats under agricultural usage, peat, for example, internationally. You know, if we talk about peat soils, an awful lot of the peat soils here are grass covered, okay? But you can understand internationally a lot of them would be in horticulture production, you know, because traditionally no stones, or they're easily managed for that, and there's different emission factors for that. There's emission factors associated with our grassland and what they remove, which are positive, that go into the national inventory. So I can't accept that there isn't a knowledge. However, I will absolutely identify that what we're committed in terms of doing is growing that knowledge and investing in the development of that knowledge. So that's where the likes of the National Soil Carbon Observatory will give us country-specific data for Ireland based on real research, which takes a number of years to put in place. But that is quite a different suggestion to that we don't have any knowledge in terms of what is our lands emitting or removing, because they are part of the reporting structure at EPA level on national inventories, whether it's number of livestock, the type of livestock, and there are standards in terms of that reporting. So you have tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. Well, I won't claim to be an expert, but basically the higher your level of data, the higher your tier reporting, and we continually are working towards increasing and improving that reporting levels. And I'm sure it's the same on forestry in terms of tiered reporting, if you want to talk about that.
As you talk on forestry, and I'll move in on that there, we have 2.8 million tonnes lost over the last 4 to 5 years of sequestration because people couldn't get licences, if you look at the targets that's put out there. And over the whole length, I think, of that number that we've lost is like 8.6 million tonnes of carbon sequesters that we have lost because the licenses are stuck in the system. Are we dreaming dreams if we have, we're 3 or 4 years now dealing with the forestry scenario, and I know it's not your section, but it's a department that government is over, and we have basically deflated a lot of farmers that don't want to go near it now because they've gone into some other scheme or they've done something else with their land. Is there a big concern in your department that in the line of forestry that the appetite is gone poor because of what has gone on and the amount of licenses, and also a bigger thing that is worrying farmers when you talk to them, the unsurety of not knowing will they be able to cut down their trees in 30 years' time? And that's a huge problem. Do you agree with that?
I suppose, just looking from my perspective, I'm just conscious that we're here to talk about, my forte and expertise is around the whole carbon, and we have agreed what are the targets, etc. You know, so, you know, I think you have Minister Hackett and the forestry team are the right people to talk about. We'll look at the policy achievement in relation to that, rather than ourselves, you know, in terms of commenting. We're clear within the Climate Action Plan there's a requirement in terms of increasing our afforestation. You know, it's a policy, it's a government policy objective. And I think, look at just in terms of...
Right, we'll go to the most thing that caught my eye, as Deputy Carty talked about there, the amount of wetland or peatlands that are being farmed around the country, be it in mountain be it in lowland from Kerry, where basically you have a lot of dairy cows. And we must remember back that the EU and the Irish government gave grants to shore this land, this peaty land, in the 80s and in the 70s, to put shores every 7 or 8 metres apart and to gravel tunnel them and to put grass into them. I think we need to be clear on this from what you have stated. The first thing I'd say to you, Mr. Callanan, is are we going to be telling those farmers, or sort of giving them a sweet to say to them, Jesus, to be better now if you hadn't cattle in and that, and you talked about water tables, and at the same time are we going to be giving it irrigation to go over 170 to someone else when 115,000 farmers can stay under 170 in derogations? And are we, those farmers in what I would call the peaty areas, you can do a lot of things in life, but you cannot do anything about where you're born. Like if you have land where you're born, you farm it, and families are brought up. And I think we need clear clarification from you that if a farmer wants to farm at the moment, say it's 170, be you in Cork or be you in Dublin or be you in Donegal, is the nitrates on that. Are you saying to me that those farmers will be left at that if they wish, or that there'll be some scheme out there to, if they want to basically do something different with their land in the line of the water tables? And I want to get back to the water tables because I want to know, what do you mean by the water tables? Because like water tables were reduced when you shore land, because you'd go in where there was a swamp and or a wet piece of ground, and where there was rushes and where there was grass not growing, to put it simple, and there was grants given. And you put in your shores and you brought it to a standard, you ploughed it and you seeded it and you made a good job of it, and you put sheep or cattle in it and you had to mind it. That'd be the first thing I'll always say. But it gave families livings from the top of Donegal to the bottom of Kerry, and the maps are there. A lot of it is in the west and the northwest. So we'll talk about the west and the northwest in general, because that's the most area affected by the figure of the 80,000 hectares that you're talking about. And I think we need, as a committee, for our constituents, Matt is in that area, we need clarification to know, are those farmers going to be let farm the way they are under the same conditions as a farmer in any other part of the country, or are they going to be being restricted through nitrates levels or other restrictions put in on them under the new, say, measures that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm struggling kind of to get to quite a number of different topics there.
And there's one topic called peatlands.
Okay,
and
now if I
another topic called farming it.
Okay, so from the peatlands point of view, I suppose, look at, there's clearly an ambition, an identification that the management of these soils is generating emissions. And I suppose, look at whatever way you look at it, it's something that from a policy perspective we have to address and support. So that's an issue of understanding the emissions, so we're investing in that.
But my question to you is that if I'm a farmer in Glenamaddy, where I come from, and I have peaty type land that was shored with the help of a grant in the EU many years ago and is growing green grass, will I be allowed, the question I want to know, and the clarification for farmers, because this is affecting a lot of farmers on the western shore when you cross the Shannon, will I be given the same, as the message you're talking about, treating your citizens equally, will I be able to have, if it's 170 kilos in Dublin, abroad in Lusk, if it's 170 kilos in the Golden Vale, will I be able to farm at that same rate, or are you looking at something different to impose on the likes of those farms?
So I'm clear, I have responsibility in nitrates overall. So I can assure you, there's certainly no plans identified in relation to, how would you call it, restriction in relation to that peat soil that I'm aware of from a nitrates point of view.
That's good to know.
However, I do want to be clear that we did have an issue that we moved to address within the voluntary review of derogation that we did 2 years ago, and which we will, it's out in the proposals currently to consider the management of derogation farms. So what do I mean by that? In the management of derogation farms, which is over 170, that was done on a whole farm approach. We had approximately 300 and something odd farms who were using or including commonage land as part of their derogation. So in theory, we're suggestive of, on a whole farm approach, that land was stocked at up to 250 kilos, which was a nonsense. And we moved to preclude that being available at stocking rates of that type of level. So the way I describe it is effectively the dilution of the stocking rate by the inclusion of marginal land. And we have continued to, that's put out under the current proposals as well, to avoid effectively a situation of compliance through, I suppose, inordinate expectation on, well, look, what's the chemical fertiliser allowance associated with this type of land, you know, particularly commonage land, or the nitrate carrying capacity of it, because it's been calculated on a whole farm basis. So if in these farms, and I don't have the individual details, they may have had 40 hectares and it was very heavily stocked, and they were compliant because they had 20 hectares of incredibly lowly stocked. And indeed, I can assure you, I got an approach years ago in terms of a number of farmers who wanted to avail of low input agri-environment schemes in terms of that element, and then being in derogation, I just said that's not.
What I'm trying to establish here is, and just to be clear, for the benefit of the farmers from Donegal down to Kerry, I'm talking about reclaimed land. That's what we'll call it. There's either loch or there's peat, there's white marl or peat, and what I'm trying to establish in that, if it's 170 a hectare right around the country in general, right, under nitrates, what you're not saying, and I think it just needs clarification from you, that those farms will not be restricted to be able to carry the stocking rate the same as any other where, when you talk about these 80,000 hectares. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying to you is, in practical terms, and I've dealt with farmers a long time, I'm not aware of land of the type you're talking about that's being stocked at that sort of level in practice. You know, if we're talking about land that's predominantly summer grazed, etc., or managed. What I am saying is we have moved and are continuing to move to a situation of overall avoidance of compliance limits under the likes of derogation through the inclusion of what is marginal land. But there are certainly no proposals currently in terms of suggested restriction through nitrates on the stock carrying capacity of that land in terms of as it's being farmed by your typical beef farmer, etc.
And what is the proposals on the re-wetting? This is what I'm trying to get my head around of this 80,000 hectares. Is this a voluntary scheme that's going to come in? Yes. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So it's going to be for a farmer to decide whether they go at it themselves or not.
Yes.
And what sort of things are you talking about doing?
So that's why the EIPs were put in place, to better understand what are the things we should be doing, and that farmers themselves are contributing through this is what innovation partnerships are built around, that you work with a certain number of farmers to understand practically what are the actions that they propose, as well as what the science is telling you is working, and come up with a suite of measures and actions that voluntarily can be rolled out to a significantly higher number of farmers.
Is there going to come a day, in your opinion, that Jackie is a farmer, Matt is a farmer, Paul or myself say that we have 50 acres of land and we have 50 cows or whatever, or 200 ewes or whatever. Is there going to come a day, and in your opinion, if there is, when, that a farmer will be looked at individually and asked that you have the cows are allegedly putting up, be it 100 tonne or whatever of carbon, and you have to have X, Y and Z to try and mitigate that. Is that going to ever come, or are we going to stay on the nitrates type of road that we're on at the moment?
I can't answer that honestly. In terms of what I did at the outset through the evidence to the committee today is identify that in my personal view, that if you look at carbon neutrality at European level, that I do see a huge role for support for agriculture for the delivery of ecosystem services, including from carbon removal. And I believe that passionately. I'm strongly a believer in that. And what I mean by that is that if you look at whether it's corporate social responsibility by companies, whether it's the endorsement, which has, I would respectfully suggest, been very, very strong under the Woodland Environment Fund, that there's an increasing expectation on industry to engage in terms of doing this. And I can't see why farmers shouldn't benefit in terms of the creation of that. But I suppose I often describe it that, look at agriculture, like everybody else, deals with efficiency, you know, and some of these things require almost inefficiency at times. So we need to create a system where there's a reward in relation to that for farmers, and that they can see the benefit, and it's crystallised economically for them in relation to it.
Last question. Just one. I just have one half one. One half one. One last question. Is the department aware under the Paris Agreement, and is it conscious, and is all departments conscious, that there is a line built into the Paris Agreement that says while you have to do things as sustainably as possible, we cannot put food under threat for the people that we're basically feeding? Is that looked into when all the different departments are looking at measures of mitigating carbon?
Well, the answer is yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Joe,